As a libertarian, I believe in open borders.
Whites, blacks, Muslims, Jews. Everyone feels like they're losing somehow.
That would be theft, right? Why is it any different when the government do it?
Elon Musk is saying if you don't fight, people are going to fight you.
Capitalism is a Western idea, is completely wrong.
And they also saw taxation beyond this as a crime that justifies an uprising.
It is our responsibility to protect our own, to protect our families.
We are next to this monument which was erected to mark the end of slavery. So I find that quite significant actually. Emancipation is very much the theme of today's conversation. We're speaking to Reem Ibrahim.
I'm talking to Reem Ibrahim.
Political commentator Reem Ibrahim.
Who's one of the real voices of libertarianism. Reem speaks a lot about small government, small taxation, small welfare. It sounds like she doesn't care about poor people. We at NZF, we only talk about helping the needy. But my deep inclination is we're going to find lots of meeting points. And the reason why it's so interesting to me is because I do feel everyone who discusses the state of Britain and the way forwards, I do feel everyone has a piece of the puzzle really. But it's understanding how to put it all together into a narrative that can work for everyone. So Reem, where are we today?
We are currently on Lord North Street, which is where my office is. 2 Lord North Street is where the Institute of Economic Affairs is, in the heart of Westminster. And it is where the Institute of Economic Affairs' offices are, where we try and fight for free market economics and a more prosperous Britain.
Prosperous Britain. If we look at Britain today, many communities feel threatened.
Yeah.
Whites, blacks, Muslims, Jews. No one feels like they're winning, everyone feels like they're losing somehow. Why do you think this is the case?
It's a really fantastic question. I think there are so many aspects to this. Britain is becoming an incredibly impoverished country. When we look at GDP and we look at our American cousins, they're doing extraordinarily well in comparison to us, but that wasn't always the case. Sort of pre-2008, the UK was sort of on par with the United States. We were doing, if not just as well, but sort of just sort of lagging behind. And now we are poorer than the poorest state in the US. If the UK was to become a United States state, we would be the poorest, so poorer than Mississippi. So it's one of those interesting aspects, I think, because where people feel like they are doing less well and they are more poor, they can't afford housing, they can't afford to feed their children. We've got 1 in 4 working age adults out of work. And when you put all of those things together, I think really it's an economic problem. And then you see, of course, political tensions, you see huge issues, and I think that fundamentally people then blame immigration or the others, those that are different to them, on all of those problems. But if we stopped immigration tomorrow, all of those problems would still exist.
So I fully agree with you actually about the economics is at the root of a lot of what's happening, but we'll circle back to the economy. But if we just focus on the fact that there is a lot of fear, the fear has set in. There are people taking great advantage in stoking this fear. Elon Musk is saying if you don't fight, people are going to fight you. So if we just look at the community cohesion side of this conversation, which is the problem today, we'll circle back to the economy in just a moment. What can we do to heal these rifts?
I really think communities are broken down as a result of government intervention. And I do think it's an economic problem fundamentally. When we see that your neighbours are on benefits and able to earn huge amounts of money or take huge amounts of money, and you yourself are working extremely hard, and you see these communities being broken down as a result of various different government programs and interventions, I really do think it's an economic problem. So the aspect of culture, I think, is really important. You know, I'm North African originally. I'm half Moroccan, half Egyptian, and you know, the community and community bonds are so extremely important to my family. But those community bonds are broken down as people move and as people change. And I really do think it's an economic problem. When you cannot afford to own your own home because house prices are absolutely through the roof, because the government are refusing to allow building to occur, that's an economic problem. And I really do believe that free markets, the government staying out of the way, is the solution, because people create communities, governments do not create communities. And that's actually why private charities like yours are so important, because you're able to really give people that agency. We don't have that when the government get involved.
Okay, so there's a few things here I want to tease apart. So I do get the idea, and again, it's one of the themes I want to circle back to, the idea that it seems communities have to almost take back control, if I could use that. It's not just the UK, but it's almost communities have to take back control of organising, structuring, caring. But I guess we're in that in-between stage where, again, it's the same idea, isn't it? People feel left behind. People feel, I guess, uncertain. So I guess, is there any non-governmental roadmap or set of interventions that are also important for us to be talking about?
Oh, absolutely. I really do think that. So I think what's interesting is communities are created as a result of people and interactions, right? And when governments get involved in that, they really do damage those communities. And I think that we see this time and time again. I mean, private charities are able to actually give people the agency. And when we're talking about people that are incredibly impoverished at the moment, right? In the United Kingdom, we are really suffering from a cost of living crisis. We have 700,000 vacancies disappeared like that when the government increased employers' national insurance contributions and the Employment Rights Bill. All of these new regulations and taxes, the government getting involved, have made the jobs market extremely difficult. It means that people are unable to find work, and fundamentally, I believe that employment, a reason to get up in the morning, is one of the best sort of social security measures you could possibly have. But the government have made that even harder to achieve. So when we're in this current situation where that's even more difficult to achieve, the government have made it more difficult to achieve, people don't have agency. They don't have responsibility. People are really struggling and they're in this welfare trap. The fact that, on benefits you could be in receipt of about £40,000 a year, you're in a trap, and it means that you don't have that agency to really take control of your life. And that's where I think a lot of private organisations have really been able to do so well. And there's something called welfare crowding out. So as the government expands, organisations like yours are crowded out. What should happen is the government should stay out of the way and allow for organisations that are in the private sector to really fundamentally do all of that work. Because what's happening is those organisations can say to a person, we want to help you as an individual. You are not like everybody else. You are an individual person. So let's ensure that you yourself are able to create a roadmap for what your life looks like, rather than just be another number in the government machine.
A lot of people listening will still be struggling with the idea of, I think, how government is almost harming community formation. If government just stepped out of the way, everything would collapse. That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
If there's a roadmap to the future that you think there should be, is it developing collaboration almost between government and non-governmental welfare actors? What do you think is the roadmap to this?
Definitely isn't the case that if the government stepped away, everything would collapse. Because the government is made up of people, and the government have a monopoly over coercion. The government can do whatever it wants with your money, and there are elements of morality about this. I mean, I believe that taxation is fundamentally theft. The government are taking money from you and telling you that they know exactly how to spend it. If a robber came into your house and said, "Give me all your money, but I promise I'll spend it well," that would be theft, right? Well, why is it any different when the government do it? So I think we are now in a situation where people believe that they have to have the government there to help them, and I don't believe that's the case at all. And actually, welfare crowding out is a really interesting concept, because What people don't realise is that, yes, at the moment, the private charity sector is struggling, partly because people aren't able to donate in large numbers, partly because the economy itself isn't growing. If you don't have wealthy people, then you don't have wealthy people to give to charities. And it means that a lot of those organisations are really struggling. You know, the fact that the charity sector in the UK has really shrunk as the economy has also contracted. So what we need is, let's not get run over. What we need is an economy that works for everybody, and I really do believe the government staying out of the way is the way you do that.
I work on medieval classical Islamic law, and somehow that led me to feeling like there's an activism required, which overlaps some of what you're saying.
We actually published a book called Islamic Foundations of a Free Society.
IEA?
IEA, yeah. So it was, and we've translated it into various different languages, including Arabic. And we have organisations in the Middle East that promote that book domestically. And the idea is that, you know, freedom, this concept of free markets and exchange, you know, what is a free market? It's the voluntary exchange of goods and services. It is a system based on consent, is actually rooted in Islamic law. And we published this book because we wanted to, you know, the idea that free markets or, you know, kind of capitalism is a Western idea is completely wrong. Capitalism, free markets are an idea that, you know, it originates from people. It's human interaction, it's community, it's people making choices and nobody telling them that they can't make those choices. It's a choice that you as an individual make. And what we really wanted to show with that book, it was actually the founder of the IEA's daughter, who's now passed away, Linda Whetstone, she co-wrote that book. And it was sort of looking at the idea that actually the idea of markets, free markets, exchange, that is rooted in Islamic law. I think that we should take back the word capitalism.
Really?
It's a positive word. Capitalism
Okay, how would you
makes us
define
wealthy.
it?
Well, I
What should it be defined as, and what should it not be associated with then?
Capitalism is the voluntary exchange of goods and services. It is
That's it?
You and me deciding we would like to exchange with one another because we've made that choice. No government can tell us that we can't. And really that's the question. What is capitalism? It is about that voluntary exchange. And I really do think that we need to take back that word, take back that term. People see the word capitalism as though it's exploitative, but
I think
really
it's the
what is
ism
it?
part, because you're describing something so basic almost. You're right, so human.
Yeah.
The most
You and me
basic thing
deciding
is
to make a
exchanging
choice.
value. So why the ism then?
It's an ism because I suppose it's an ideology. It is an idea. And I think that idea is wonderful. It's about freedom. It's about liberty. It's about you and me making a choice. And I really do believe, so I am a sort of libertarian in my view on the government, but I hold certain opinions, I hold certain views. I am a conservative in my view on things like family and community, but those things are a choice. Those are choices that I make, and no government can make you make those choices. I really do think that the idea that capitalism or capital being exchanged is exploitative is a complete lie. The idea that the worker is exploited by the capitalist, again, I think is completely untrue. Because of the Industrial Revolution and because of markets, we have become so much richer. We have lifted billions of people out of poverty. That is what capitalism is.
Could I ask, you got me thinking, does libertarianism, which I guess is the set of ideas we've explored since we've come down the walk, do you want to summarise it in a sentence, or are you happy with what you've just said?
Yeah,
just for
I
people
think,
who are new to the word.
Well, so I would describe myself as a libertarian, and what that means is I believe that the government should stay the hell out of everything we do. And I think that community and individual human beings are able to make better choices than governments can. I don't think it's right or moral or just for the government to tell you that they know how to spend your money better than you do. I believe that people know how to spend their own money better than they can. And so really, when I say I'm a libertarian, it just means that I believe that the government should stay out of the way of almost every aspect of our lives. The only thing I think government should exist for is to protect property, to uphold contracts, to have a judicial system, and I'd basically get rid of everything else. The idea that we have a department for culture, media and sport that costs £8 billion, I think is absolutely ludicrous. Why does that exist? And no, if we abolish that department, sport would not disappear, it would still exist. So the fact that the government are able to just spend your money willy-nilly without you being able to make a choice about where that money goes, I think is immoral, and that's why I'm a libertarian. I think that you can hold different values and opinions on things. I hold relatively conservative opinions on things like family and society, probably because of my Muslim upbringing. But those things and those ideas are choices that I personally make, and I live that throughout my everyday life. I think that it's completely immoral for the government to tell you what you can and cannot do with your own lives and with your own bodies. And I think that people, businesses, human beings should be able to make choices for themselves.
Okay. Now, thank you for that introduction. And it might sound very strange because I'm in a welfare space.
Yeah.
Muslim community is very welfare focused. And I think many in our community have always assumed that what you're saying is anti-welfare, and the more people are helped, whether through government, whether through non-governmental actors, that's an ideal future. No one's being left behind. What I find interesting, to confirm what you said earlier though, is that I've been an academic and writer, researcher in Islamic law, and what you're saying, we'll bring it back to Britain though, because it's this transition and the strangeness of understanding what it means today. But I do confirm what you said about the past. Many scholars say that Muslim jurists, Western scholars and classical scholars, they almost functioned as people who restricted the power of government. They determined very particular forms of taxation. Zakat is taxation in the classical world, but the rate is fixed, the recipients are fixed. They had very fixed tax codes, and the general idea was government is not allowed to tax beyond, unless, well, there's a few items. There's a land tax, but they even determined maximums and minimums.
Government was limited.
And the idea was government had no right to tax beyond this unless it was a temporary necessary need.
Like going to war.
Exactly. There's a big attack and they have to show that we're empty. Like they've spent what they have and now we're empty. Or there's a dam being built, it's necessary, can everyone here please chip in? We need to build this thing. And they also saw taxation beyond this as a crime that is justifies an uprising. But what might sound strange as I say this to people who don't associate this with Islamic legal thinking, the society wasn't bereft of welfare. If you walked into any Islamic city, medieval Cairo, Damascus, any city in Morocco, anywhere in the entire Muslim world, you would find free hospitals, free schools, and really interesting things. So Bursa has a free hospital for sick birds because birds fly north to south over Bursa. And so you had a whole wealth of welfare, increasing generation to generation, but was driven by private endowment. The idea was that it was in the air, like you work, I work, but it's in the air that if I want to leave a legacy, I'll leave some of my wealth for the public good. So as time goes on, public institutions get richer and richer, and they're all driven by us as private individuals. So however strange it sounds, what you're describing is something that is very familiar to me in the old world.
Let's bring it back to Britain. That was also the case in the UK. We had private charities that supported people that were in need, and those charities were in abundance because they have to compete with one another to provide amazing services. That is what capitalism provides. It provides amazing services that you get to choose to put your money towards. If you're a private actor and you want to give your money to a charity and you can see that they're doing great work, you'll make the choice to give your money there. You don't have a choice when it comes to taxation. You don't have a choice when it comes to the government. And what we're seeing now is all of that welfare is being crowded out by the state. So this has basically happened across all of Europe. In the UK...
It's the whole modern world though. It's like...
and it's the government's fault.
There's an academic...
And I think we're worse off for it.
Sohail Hanif, he's a Palestinian academic in New York. He has this...
Stand out of the pool. I didn't want your trousers to get wet. Sorry, Karen, this is academic.
It's contentious. It's called The Impossible State. And its contention is Islamic governance as found in the classical experiment or experience He claims it's impossible in the modern world because all states, whether they're liberal democratic, whether they're monarchical, they're all in this form of the modern nation state which exists to centralize power and control. So it's not, as far as the thesis goes, I don't think the thesis is about Western world or even the democracy. It's something more fundamental in modernity. But then the question comes, if we feel this is not good, which is your view, and I think the jury is hung for many people, including myself, what is good or not good in where we are today. If you say this is not good, and the old experience of humanity is good, then we have to talk about roadmaps.
Yeah.
Because
how do we get there?
Because we're not see, the idea is, if someone is homeless, there's someone homeless, this is a monument for emancipation, someone homeless is sleeping underneath it. And it's interesting dichotomy of, are you emancipated if you're got nowhere to stay as well?
Yeah.
But the question is, we all think in the park, that's not my problem, that's the government's problem. We have to transform as human beings if we're going to enter the kind of world you're describing.
I think you're absolutely right.
So in other words, that's why I feel if the government stopped, we wouldn't catch it, because we're not those types of humans anymore.
Yeah.
So what's that journey?
I think it starts with conversations like this, and I think people tend to, when we discussed capitalism, the idea that capitalism is only for the rich or the wealthy or those that are at the top really want that. And I think it's really important to have those conversations. And actually, I don't believe that the government is the best person to step in because they're a coercive power. Why can't communities and people, human beings, be able to do that? And we see this time and time again. I think every time the government get involved, things get worse. But you're right, there needs to be a roadmap. And I think it starts with conversations like this. If the government stepped out of the way, the world wouldn't collapse. Actually, we would flourish. And as we've discussed, I mean, a lot of that does come down to what things looked like in the medieval ages and Islamic jurisprudence, where we're actually talking about the fact that people are able to make decisions for themselves and they're able to make economic decisions for themselves. And fundamentally, I mean, what is economics? It is human beings making decisions. It is human behaviour. And I think that human beings are better at making those decisions themselves without some government telling them that they can't.
If we weren't in today's world, we could argue that this conversation is fully academic. But in today's Britain, again, it goes back to the beginning, right? Everyone feels it is broken in the sense that even if the government taking care of everyone is the right thing, which can be argued, it's clearly not able to do it.
We are currently in a situation where the government is bigger than it ever has been. Public spending as a proportion of GDP is now at 45%. The government is half of the economy. The government is bigger than it has ever been before, and yet we are not better off for it. We are better off when people are able to make choices in the private sector. The fact that the government tax us and spend more of our money and waste it, I don't think is a good thing. And let's talk about a couple of examples. I think the labour market is a fantastic example. 1 in 4 working adults are currently out of work. We're talking about the age bracket between 16 and 64-year-olds. 1 in 4 are out of work. We are currently in a situation where if you wanted to say, I have anxiety, I have depression, I have writer's cramp, you can claim huge amounts of benefits by the government. And the problem with that is we've created a welfare trap. There is very little incentive for a young family to be able to actually go out to work, especially in the poorest communities. There was an interesting documentary that was done by Channel 4 with Fraser Nelson, who was the former editor of The Spectator, and he went and spoke to a lot of these people. And there was one example that really stood out to me. There was a young mum called Amy, who is not that much older than me, and she has a young child, and she's earning taking about £40,000 a year from the government when you include housing benefit, personal independence payments for her anxiety and depression, which counts as a disability. And she said, I want to work, but if I go to work, I'm not going to be earning £40,000. That, in a nutshell, is the welfare trap. And people are worse off for it. You don't have a reason to get out of bed in the morning. Work, employment gives you hope, it gives you dignity, it gives you respect, it gives you a reason to get up in the morning. The best welfare is work, it's a job, right? And the government have completely distorted that. So we're now in a situation where the government have controlled the labour market in this way. They've increased employers' national insurance contributions, which is effectively a jobs tax. It is making employing somebody more expensive. So when the government did that, we saw, lo and behold, the number of vacancies in the United Kingdom decline significantly. We saw about 700,000 vacancies disappear in the 3 months before September of 2025. And this isn't just some coincidence, this didn't just happen randomly, it's happened directly as a result of the government's interventions. Another example is the minimum wage. I don't believe we should have a minimum wage at all. And part of the reason for that is because a lot of young people are now being priced out of the jobs market. If you're an employer and the government have increased the minimum wage, it doesn't cost the government anything, but businesses don't magically get more money, right? That money has to come from somewhere, and it happens with there being less vacancies, you're going to hire less people, you're probably going to increase the wages at a slower rate, and you're going to give less people an opportunity. We're now in a situation where we have thousands of young people, young, healthy, educated people out of work. This didn't just happen randomly, it happened directly as a result of the government's interventions.
No, thank you for sharing. I don't think I'm in the right position to respond one way or the other. I fully get your reasons and your arguments. I think on the other side, I think the economy is so complicated because we're in a debt bubble. A quick question, usury and libertarianism, is there a position?
I suppose, well, with usury?
Yeah.
In what way, what respect?
Just because we were talking about capitalism back there, and you said it's just a free exchange of goods, whereas for many other people, it's a more exploitative positioning for the capital owner. And the main mechanism of that is a usurious relationship with the economy. So it keeps capital growing with the owners. So does libertarianism have any, as a philosophy, a position on usury?
It's about the morality of this. So as a worker, let's talk about the labour market specifically. As a worker, I have more power the more vacancies that there are and the more choice I'm able to make. I have more power to negotiate better working conditions, higher wages, better maternity cover, whatever it is. I have better bargaining power the more vacancies there are and the more choice that I have. That's supply and demand, right?
Yeah.
If somebody is trying to employ me and I've got 4 employers trying to employ me, then I have more power. I have less power the less vacancies there are and the less the economy grows. That's where exploitation comes from. Actually, a really great example of this is the rental market. I'm a renter in London myself. I know how terrible it really is, how expensive housing is, and that is supply and demand. The fact that the demand has outgrown the supply has meant that housing is so much more expensive. It means that the amount of homes available has been restricted because the government have made it very difficult to build. The fact that you probably spend the same amount actually filling out all of the forms and the bureaucracy when it comes to building something than actually physically building the house is insane. And it's because planning permission is very difficult to get. We know that local councils tend to block housing development because there is political capital involved. We call them NIMBYs and not in my backyarders. The amount of times local councils or local people will lobby local councils to block housing development is insane. And those people are evil, evil people that make the housing much more expensive. But when the government add all of these regulations, it means that me as a renter, my choice is limited. If there was an abundance of homes, the landlords, the exploiters that people tend to call them, would have more of an incentive to improve the quality of housing. Housing will be cheaper, more affordable and better quality the more of it we have and the more choice that I have in a market. At the moment, when housing is restricted, a landlord has very limited incentive to improve the quality of the housing. They can do it out of the goodness of their heart, they can do it because they want to outcompete their competitors, but when there are a limited amount of competitors because housing is restricted, they have more power than I do. If you want renters to have more power, build more homes, increase the size of the market. That will ensure that there is genuine choice and landlords are competing for your rent.
No, thank you for the examples. I think all I was trying to say earlier was just that, like minimum, again, I'm just trying to voice anyone who I think also might be listening to this. It's something like removing the minimum wage. It looks like you're opening up people who don't own capital, who need to work, to a form of exploitation. And I think the only thing why did usury suddenly come in my mind at that point? It was just the hardest thing to identify as cause and effect, meaning is government minimum waging and the only cause in play? Is the debt bubble another cause in play? Where does globalism fit in? Globalization, did Brexit? I mean, there's so many factors. So your arguments make complete sense.
The minimum wage is one
abstraction,
example.
But I guess it's just
Sweden doesn't
for
have
us
a minimum
to observe.
wage. Sweden, people see it as a socialist country. They don't have a minimum wage. And the reason for that is because employers and unions are able to negotiate freely and they don't want the government involved. Sweden has no minimum wage. So the idea that the minimum wage protects people is completely incorrect. So many young people are now out of work because they've been priced out of the labour market because we have a minimum wage. I would abolish the minimum wage and ensure that the economy is actually growing so that there is more incentive to employ younger people at a higher rate. But at the moment, we've got a restricted labour market. The government are about to implement new regulations that will make employing somebody so much more difficult. We've got an increase in national insurance contributions, so employing somebody is literally more expensive because the government are taxing you more. And at the same time, the government say at every budget we're going to hike up the minimum wage, which prices out thousands of young people from ever entering the labour market. So people might say, try living on £10 an hour, it's tough. Try living on £0 an hour because you haven't got a job. That's what happens when the government hike up the minimum wage. And quite frankly, I think it's one of those issues where people think that the capitalists or the free marketeers, those that hold my position on economics, are only out for the rich and only want to protect the wealthy. And it's the complete opposite. I want people to be lifted out of poverty. I want people in this country to be better off, and they are not better off when the government is expanding. People in this country are better off when the government stays out of the way and ensures that those people are able to spend money how they would like. Business is able to actually employ more people. That improves welfare. When private charities are able to spend that money in and also be donated to in the first place, they're able to develop genuinely fantastic services. The government being involved in all of that doesn't make sense. One example I think is interesting is the NHS. The NHS needs to be abolished. It is one of the...
It's not very popular, that one.
The NHS is one of the worst institutions that we have developed. And I'm not talking about the specific people. The doctors and nurses in the NHS work extremely hard. But we currently spend just below £200 billion a year on the NHS. We spend more and more money every single year. The NHS has never had more money than it has now. And we look at the rest of Europe and we see that they have quite fantastic healthcare systems, and yet anybody that makes a suggestion that maybe perhaps the NHS is not fit for purpose is called evil and terrible and disgraceful. I get personal death threats and attacks for criticising the National Health Service as a healthcare system, whereas the rest of Europe, Germany, Switzerland, the Netherlands, Denmark, all of these countries have competitive market systems. Nobody goes without healthcare, but you choose where you get your healthcare from.
Even if you don't have money?
Even if you don't have money, the government create a statutory minimum package. So there is a minimum requirement that healthcare services provide. But anything above that, you make choice. You have those choices to make. In this country, in Britain, for some bizarre reason, we clap for the NHS and pray for the NHS and want to protect the NHS when the NHS is killing you. In the year before the pandemic, we had the second highest avoidable mortality rates in all of Western Europe. That is not something to be proud of. I am not proud of the NHS. And yet for some reason, we believe that the NHS is some kind of sacred cow that we have to pray to. It's insane. The NHS is not something to be proud of. When you look at basically every single healthcare outcome and the amount of money we spend on it, it is abysmal in comparison to our European counterparts. And yet at the same time we are spending record levels of money on it. Clearly something doesn't work, and I believe it is because incentives are off. we don't have choice. The NHS is a socialist monopoly that crowds out private providers, and it means that we as individuals don't have choice. So if one hospital does badly, they have no incentive to help you because there is no link between the consumer and the producer. In basically every European country, I think Switzerland is a fantastic example of this. If you don't like one particular provider and they're doing a not very good job, or their stats are terrible, or the receptionist is rude to you, you can leave and put your money somewhere else. In the UK, we don't have that choice. And for some reason, I'm evil for pointing that out.
Okay, so I'm not going to go deeper into this. I'm fond of the NHS in terms of my own experiences, and you'll be surprised. I used to compare our organisation to a sort of communal NHS, which you might like and dislike the metaphor. The idea is that we all pay in and we can all draw out if we have need, and we all have points of access to make a sort of national Zakat system. That's how I've sort of described it. And as you want to think about it, it's like an NHS. We sort of build it, we fund it, we access it. You might or might not like, because obviously, we talked about private support earlier. But if I can just circle back to the layer above this. So this could have been a fully academic conversation if everything worked, but it doesn't work. And so people do need a roadmap forwards. The only roadmaps we come across are either hate, which, as you said correctly, we can hate everyone out of the island, and that's not going to solve any of the actual underlying problems.
I think immigration is a scapegoat for a lot of the problems that we currently face. And look, don't get me wrong, some of the stats are pretty shocking. The fact that particular ethnicities are more likely to commit specific crimes, I think is really disgusting. I mean, what was really interesting, I think, is around the rape gang inquiries that we saw this year, where a lot of people were saying, where are the Muslim leaders that are coming out and criticising this? And there were plenty, but they weren't being shown in the media. And I think there is a specific narrative around people that look different to you. And look, as a libertarian, I believe in open borders. I believe that the government should not be able to tell a business who they can and cannot hire, right? I believe that people should be able to interact with one another without the government telling them they can't. I believe that to be the case in the labour market, in healthcare, in education, and indeed in the labour market when it comes to immigration. The problem is that the welfare state is so enormous that it acts as a magnet for loads and loads of people coming to the United Kingdom and not working. And I think that that's a real problem, and I think it's right that British people are angry that their taxpayer money is being spent on immigration. But to be clear, if immigration stopped tomorrow, we would still have a housing crisis because we don't build enough homes, because the government tell providers that they can't. We would still have a broken healthcare system because it's a government monopoly that we continue spending more and more money on. If anything, things would probably be worse because we've got an ageing population. We actually need more people in the labour market that are working, not less. We would still have extremely high taxes to fund the absolutely enormous size of the state. So immigration being used as a scapegoat is really interesting because it's understandable why people are angry. Their communities are changing, things look different. But if immigration stopped tomorrow, all of these problems would still exist.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. I think everyone, I'm guessing, who would listen to this would agree with you. Hate's not the answer. Carrying on can't possibly be the answer because it's where we are today.
The answer is reducing the size of the state.
But something else as well, right? Which is just something has to catch us. And I think both you and I have agreed since the beginning it's going to be community. So then it becomes what kind of community development is required, because this is like a golden moment for people who believe in what you believe because the cracks are showing. It's a golden moment to say we have something else. But if we stay in, I guess, the abstract or the critique space of it, people won't see, well, where are you taking us? So I feel it's this alignment then with critique, but then it's building up community again. It's sort of re-educating human beings about the old way we've always lived, which is feeling responsible for each other. So we're, in our organization, doing that through Zakat community building, the idea that we are responsible for our own. We have to build localized hubs. We have to create centers of representation. So I feel faith is going to be an important ingredient for what can catch us because government can't catch. Whether people agree with you that it should shrink or whether they think it should stay the same, it can't catch anymore. That's the bottom line. So there's a new future being created whether we like it or not, but we have to almost proactively build the future we think is going to work. In my mind, all faiths have a charitable ethos, have community building, and have physical centers, which can be hubs for solidarity. So what do you think about faith as the safety net and faith coalitions as what can catch the future that you think Britain should go towards?
It's a really beautiful way of putting it, I think. It's interesting because community comes from people, right? Community is built naturally, organically, spontaneously. The government doesn't create community, people do. And I almost think that this is already a natural part of the way we live. Of course, Great Britain is becoming a less religious country. There are less people that are now saying that they believe in something. But I think it's more than that. You know, you can have faith without believing in all of the specifics. Because, I mean, historically, churches, mosques, they've always been the place that the homeless or the persecuted seek refuge. And I don't think that that's changed. I don't think that has to change. The problem is that the government has crowded out a lot of those community spaces, but I think it's beautiful that charities like yours are able to actually provide that space for people in the United Kingdom. You're able to develop that, and I think it's really important because faith and community when you come together. I mean, I think it's interesting. I think about my family at Eid. You know, we're able to come together, and everybody perhaps brings a dish. Everybody comes together, and you know, if you see one kid fall over, you'll help out no matter whose kid it is, because we come together as a community, right? We're together, and we develop that kind of responsibility for one another. That, on a large scale, really is what we're talking about. But community is a choice, it is a development, and I wouldn't describe your charity like the NHS, because with the NHS you don't have choice, right? People choose to give money to your charity, and that's really the beauty of voluntary exchange. That's the beauty of capitalism, that's the beauty of the market, that's the beauty of freedom. What I really believe is freedom to flourish. It's the freedom, the space, human beings are being given the freedom, the space to develop community bonds, and that doesn't happen through government, it happens through human beings spontaneously, and I don't believe that the government getting involved in that helps. But when it comes to faith, that comes from the individual. That can't come from some government central bureaucrat telling you what that means. That comes from you in your heart, in your soul. It comes from your mind. Only you know what you believe. Nobody else can decide that for you. And I really do believe that perhaps we would be a more faithful country had the government not stepped in all these ways.
Okay, now you've mentioned Eid. Let me circle to Eid a little bit. The reason why I wanted to ask you, because I thought we would end up in this place where we almost have to create a new human being, just only because we've forgotten to care for each other, basically. And I think it comes from education. It comes right from the beginning. People would call that capitalism. That's why capitalism means so many things to people. Because one theory is education is only there to make us workers. And so it trains us in a particular way of being a human in the world. And part of that thing is we're not responsible for anybody. We just got to do our work, basically. So I did think we would end up in the need to formulate the new human being who is a communal creature, if I could use that word, who feels morally responsible for each other, because that's the only net we can create. Now, you've talked about your North African origins, you've talked about Eid right now. I do always feel that traditional communities have something to teach us about these values. How have those values of your upbringing, I think, informed you in what you believe today and what you think the country can learn from you and from where you've come from?
Yeah, that's, I don't know if the country can really learn very much from me, but I think that it's interesting, I think. One example is a lot of Asian cultures, or indeed Arab cultures, would have their elderly members of their family in their home, and it's just a given that, you know, you protect your family. And for some reason in the UK and in many Western countries, we've developed this idea that the government is somehow responsible for getting involved and providing old age care. So you put your old family members in homes. And that is just completely unthinkable in my culture. I would never put my parents in their old age. I'll threaten it, but I will never put them in a home. That's unthinkable with strangers and people they don't know. They're better off at home with their families. And I think that's just one example of where our cultures have sort of clung on to that idea that it is our responsibility to protect those that are vulnerable. It is our responsibility to protect our own, to protect our families, and to look after those that can't look after themselves. We would never put, if you think about, Asian cultures, Arab cultures, we would never put our elderly members of our family in a home away from us. We would always look after them and protect them, and that's something we've clung on to. I think that's just one example. But really it is about community and feeling as though it is your duty. I think duty is probably the right word. It is your duty to look after those in your community that you protect. And the idea being that if you fell on hard times, somebody else would be able to protect you. And I think that perhaps we could all do better. I could certainly do better in terms of practicing that in my everyday life. But it's the same way you feel, with your family. I feel a duty and responsibility over my siblings to protect them and ensure that they are doing the best they possibly can in life. I feel that way about my cousins and my parents, perhaps community being expanded in that way to include your neighbours and your extended family members, to ensure that actually we are, as a community, protecting one another. But that's voluntary and that's choice, and I think that it's really important that faith is a part of that, because faith is what drives you to believe in that and to believe you're part of a community. And faith does bring people together. I mean, historically, mosques and churches and synagogues, religious organisations have been places where vulnerable people seek refuge. But the idea is that if you ever fell on hard times, you'd be able to protect yourself too, or people will be able to help you. I really do think that in Great Britain today we'd be able to do that, right? We'll be able to develop those community bonds. And I don't think it really is creating a new human being. I think it's in us already. It's just about the government staying out of the way and ensuring that we can feel responsible for one another. But that responsibility comes with, freedom comes with responsibility. And that responsibility will fall on us as communities. And I'm sure that we would see many more organisations like yours exist had the government not crowd them out. So let's create them, let's develop them, let's have these conversations about why our communities are breaking down and how we can make them stronger, because I really do believe that those bonds are what make us flourish as human beings.
No, I think we've come to a beautiful point of agreement. A lot of what you said, if these became sound bites, would sound like you don't care about needy people, you don't care about people who will get naturally left behind. And I think we've sort of fleshed out, maybe I overstated the new human being, and maybe it's the ancient human being, it's the original human being. Maybe we have forgotten something original. Yeah. So it's clear that you do have those values, and I think maybe it's just, I'm just calling it the safety net. I think it's very hard to imagine, I think for myself and most people listening, if you just turn off the government, everything is going to just be caught. And it's the idea of the roadmap, the safety net. We've agreed very much it's in community. I think faith will have a strong narrative to play in this. There's a resurgence of faith on the far right side as well. Get the immigrants out. We are Christians. People maybe wouldn't have publicly identified like that, for a political purpose. So I think faith is going to have a role to play no matter what. And I do agree with you. I think welfare state has a role in saying it's not specifically anti-God, but there's something about it where faith was the safety net. I understand why in your narrative faith is moved out of the way a bit. And because this is cracking, faith is coming back. But I think the faith that will build the future that you're looking for is the engaged faith communities being hubs for welfare, collaborating together and really organizing their faith communities. So I think that's a good point of, agreement. for us to end
And
upon.
crucially, this isn't just some academic theoretical conversation. I mean, this is the real world. We actually published a report just a few weeks ago that looked at 23 OECD countries. The idea that the government taxing more and spending more and increasing the size of the welfare state improves welfare outcomes is a myth. Most countries that are on the better end in terms of their education outcomes, social inclusion, their welfare, their overall welfare, are the low tax countries, the situations where the government is smaller. And it is because you have so much more community, but also with things like education and healthcare, the services are much more improved because you have a competitive market and choice. So the idea that the government is the only way we can make ourselves richer is completely untrue. It's actually the complete opposite. The government makes us poorer. How have we managed to lift 1 billion people out of absolute poverty? It's not through government. It's through markets. It's through trade. It's through work. It's through employment. It's through choice. That's how we've achieved that. And it's a remarkable achievement. I really do believe that human beings are remarkable and we can do so much greatness. We just have to have the freedom to do it first.
So my introduction to libertarianism was in 2008, which was Ron Paul's presidential
Yes.
Republican election.
Yeah.
I loved him because he was anti-war, and we always love anti-war US
Yeah.
candidates. So I started following him and looking up, that's when I first heard about it. And he had one position, which was this idea of the return of the gold standard,
Yes.
which in the undercurrents of the Muslim community is always tossed around. Because obviously, again,
Should we go down
classical
this way?
Islamic law is built on notions of real money.
Yeah.
So what are your takes on money?
I love this question. You're absolutely right. I think that the part of the problem is that the money, money is being created by the government, and it isn't real money, right? We call it fiat currencies, fiat
Yeah.
money. The government create it. Now the problem is that's how we get inflation. Inflation is there being too much money in the economy chasing too few goods. So as the money supply increases, as the government literally print more money, money is worth less. And that's why the pound in your pocket is worth less now than it was 10 years ago. That is inflation. And that only occurs because money doesn't have intrinsic value in that sense. I do believe that we should buy more gold. Buy more gold, and this isn't financial advice, but the fact that you have genuine intrinsic value, it's divisible. I also think that we're seeing this revolution in money, in cryptocurrencies, in Bitcoin, specifically that was the original, and I think that we're seeing a revolution because people are realizing that fiat currencies that the government make are not valuable in itself, and actually the government can devalue it, and they have an incentive to devalue it, especially when 10% of spending is on debt interest payments.
Have you guys written on this as well?
We have. I can also give you a book about
So
that
what's your
too.
position, the official position? Is there
Well,
one?
My position
It's another roadmap story, you
on-
see, all of these are.
on gold.
What should
The gold
what
standard?
should be what should the direction of travel be for our theory of money?
I think that the government creating more money is how we end up with inflation. I also do think that we probably will be forced to go back onto the gold standard at some point. It depends on how bad things get, currently. Part of the problem is that people don't understand what money actually is, and the idea that the British pound is valuable because the government's created it, I think is slowly fading away. People are realising that value does not come from the government. Value indeed often comes from people making those choices. What is value, right? How do you decide that that is worth £10? It's because it's an idea. It's an idea that you as a human being judge the value of that thing. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think that obviously in Islamic law, I think basically we've got to return to the original text and see what they say. And I really do think that gold is extremely valuable. It's very difficult to get more of it, and it means that it will always hold that value.
It's interesting in the modern Islamic jurisprudential debates on crypto. You've got one group saying it's haram, don't touch
Haram?
it. Yeah, because
Who's saying it's haram?
it's not backed by government. It's like
There
you're
no
investing
idea
in nothing
Islam
real
that
because
money
there's nothing
has to
real.
be-
But then on the other side of this, because there's nothing real in it, right? Then on the other side of the spectrum is the group that say it's more halal than the regular
It
money
is. I believe it is.
because government is not the basis of money and it allows there to be some value outside of what
Yeah.
people are giving each
Also,
other.
with Bitcoin, there is a fixed amount. So it is actually, I think, more halal than the
So it's a funny
government's
debate
money.
at the backdrop of all of today is just,
Yeah.
is Bitcoin more halal or is it haram?
I think it's more halal. The idea that money has to be backed by the government is not in Islamic law, and I am not a Islamic
fully agree.
scholar,
No,
but I don't believe
fully
that's
agree
the
with
case.
you. It's the idea of being real. I think that no one ever said government's needed for money, like ever. But when Bitcoin came on the scene, the idea was at least government is a real entity with real assets, which is
Yeah.
backing this note. Whereas you don't know who's behind the Bitcoin, and it was this
Yeah.
idea of real versus non-real. But anyway, we're just interesting.
No,
it's
I
at the
think that
backdrop
is such
of the
an interesting
question.
debate, absolutely. And I think that part of the problem is we believe that the government is the most valuable thing, that everything that is backed by the government is real. And I don't think that's true. What is real and what is not real is decided by human beings, it's decided by individuals. And actually, I think money is such a fantastic example of this. It's interesting that you heard about libertarianism first from Ron Paul.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
And also, you didn't answer my question on usury. You kind of sidestepped
Oh,
it.
yeah,
But what was the
well-
reason for that?
Well, I think part of it is
I was just curious
the-
if there is a
no,
thing.
No, not at all. Well, I think the idea that people are being exploited is not something that libertarians would concur with, because people.
So there's no
are not-
usury position in libertarianism. Usury is not neither good nor bad.
It's not. It's about whether. Well, it depends on what you mean by it, right? Do you think that human beings are being exploited in the labour market, for example?
But that's not usury, right? Usury is just an unequal exchange, right?
Yeah.
So
But
if I own,
those exchanges are more equal the more supply and demand that there is, right?
but if you
So-
break it down to this most basic level, is that I have a ton of money, you don't. You come to me, and I say, okay, I'll give you £1,000, but you got to pay me back 1,500, right? So we would call this, at least in the Muslim world and all religions before, a time, would have called this exploitation by definition, because I'm taking advantage of your need to enter into an unequal exchange. Meaning, if you were left without need, you wouldn't agree to a demonstrably unequal exchange. That's the intrinsic exploitation in a usurious exchange. So what do you say about that?
Well, I don't believe that is the case. I mean, I think also it's interesting when it comes to interest. Interest is the cost of time, and it's been documented quite a lot that in Islamic law interest is haram. I wouldn't make it illegal. I think that if people can make those choices, and interest is the cost, when you're taking out a loan, it's the cost of that time. I don't think that's exploitative. It's a choice that some people choose to make. Sometimes it's a choice that people make when they have very limited options. But in the example that you gave, I don't believe that is exploitation itself. You have a higher bargaining chip because you have more of that wealth. But that doesn't mean that that's exploitation. It means that you have a higher bargaining chip. It means that you have you're in a better bargaining position. I would like to be in a position where everybody is able
That's
to
what
make those
exploitation would
choices.
mean though, in English, right? I'm exploiting your need
Well,
to
then in that
exact,
case, you could say that
an unequal exchange.
you charging £10 for a Starbucks coffee is exploitation.
No.
It isn't.
No, that's a free market, because if I charged £100 for a Starbucks coffee, it's not demonstrably unequal. I've just evaluated this at 100, and if you agree with me, we've evaluated. No one will say, I've demonstrably taken advantage of you, because these are two different items.
So how
But
is
if
it
it's
any
money
different
for
to this
money,
situation?
then it's demonstrably different, because one is 10 and one is 100. Like it's demonstrable that they're
But
not
it's the-
equal.
but that is the cost of time.
Whereas in trade, it's two different items, so you evaluate them on the market.
But that's the cost of time, right? The example you gave of taking out a loan, asking somebody with lots
Yeah.
of money for a loan. The reason why you're doing that is because you value the money in that moment higher than you value it in 10 years' time when you have to pay back the loan.
Yeah.
That is interest, right? Interest
Mm-hmm.
is fundamentally the cost of time. And
Which is the exploitation, right? Leads to
don't-
a debt,
I
a
don't
form
believe
of
it
debt
is.
slavery, Well, it is though, right? Payday loan sharks. It's the idea that we can really trap you in debt and destroy your life through debt. So
I think that we should have more debt. I think that actually one of the problems with the UK is we have such stringent financial regulations that it's impossible to take out a loan. And actually, when you look at the United States, most people have credit cards, most people are able to have debt, and it does mean that you are wealthier. You're able to make riskier decisions when it comes to your business because you're able to shore up that debt. The problem is, and this circles back to the point about money, the government creating fiat currencies, creating money, means that the government itself is in debt, and there is an incentive to devalue it because it means that the debt is worth less. There are
you know, it's really interesting, and again, the traditional Islamic model, the reason why the author said Islamic governance is impossible in the modern world, it's because lawmaking was so diffused. Every faith community was meant to be governed by its own faith community. There was no public law on marriage or public law on food or public law on anything. So public law was like a thin layer of protecting wealth and property. And even judges, even the judiciary, which you said government should have, in classical Islamic thought, there was no central judiciary.
Yeah.
Every community has its judiciary. And even Muslim judges are told, if people come with a dispute from their faith community, you don't have a jurisdiction to judge according to what we are taught. And so modern states can't handle that level of pluralism.
Yeah.
But one thing that would be interesting is that one of the things they felt entered into the thin layer of public law was the prohibition of usury, because it was undermining markets. So there was nothing wrong with selling pork and alcohol and letting communities do what they do. But the idea was that usury is part of this public, protecting a public good in this very thin layer of law. And maybe what was supported this was that all faith communities thought usury was illegal anyway, right? So it wasn't like it's imposing Sharia on people. It was a widely understood thing, but it's just interesting that they noted it in the very thin layer of public law because it just protected markets so that they could be free.
Yeah.
Anyway, just something
No, that's
to share
really
with you.
interesting. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. It's been great.
It's very beautiful.